The shaila he asks now, they say, is as follows. He stated in Nois Daled that to go from Eretz Oni Mitzrayim, as he described, Anias in Das, in general, in detail, Chochma, Binda, and to go to Eretz Zavas Cholav Dvash, it is the opposite extreme, and it cannot happen without a process, an intermediary process. And that intermediary process, that journey, is the 40 years in the desert, going from Eretz Oni to Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Toiv Rechav is explained. What's the avodah that connects? Achrei Hashem v'lekeichem telechu, following after God, literally, which explained to means an avodah which is an external avodah, as it were, achrei, as opposed to a pnimisdik avodah. This was immediately challenged in Oisei. How can we say b'chlal that there's virtue, and it's necessary to have an avodah which is chitzonius? Everything has to, in the words of the Maimar, avodah mekuva, the hoped for avodah. It's an interesting expression, the hoped for avodah. Many ways you could say that. You could say the true avodah, the emes avodah. No, it's interesting that the hoped for avodah. Just going to comment on this word hoped for. When you say true or any other description, so you're talking just objectively about what in the avodah itself. When you invoke the word hoped for, you're talking about the master, the balabos. He's hoping. You're already involving the one for whom the avodah is directed, and his hope is that it should be an avodah pnimius. It's a lotion we find this hope very often in the Rebbe's letters and so on. Tikvasi chazaka, my strong hope is that you will, etc. It's a common expression. So the question is that they hoped for avodah is pnimius, and it began matan teire panim el panim, and then even afterwards, bakshu panai, seek my face. The Bilers will give, and as we do, give a pruta to a poor person before davening, and then daven. And how does he describe davening? And Ibn Tzedek, through tzedakah, he explains the pasuk, Echse panecha, behold your pnimius. So what is this? Achrei avay lekeichem telechu is a critical step from that links Mitzrayim and Eretz Yisrael. And then he added the question, but why are we insisting that avodah must be pnimius? Moishe Rabbeinu was told, where he says, to which he answered, that's talking about the experience of a likus. Our experience of a likus cannot be the pnimius of a likus. We're talking here avodah. What are you giving of yourself? Avodah has to be pnimius. Bakshu panai, panecha v'avakesh. We tell Hashem, search my innards and see that I search your innards. So what is this union of achra v'alekechem teleich? Let's go up to now. So the bottom of page Kuf Pei Aleph, the second ois of ois hey, if you have a different layout in your Maimar. But the matter is, shekadei lo v'laveda the bakshu pana espanecha via vakesh. Indeed, in order to arrive at the avodah, I've searched my pnimius and see that I seek your pnimius. Nonetheless, to get there, must begin with this external avodah, as it were. He now explains, the entire system of creation, every level has an external level and an internal level. So it's already a huge statement that not that there is the world of chitzonius, then you leave that behind and you enter the world of pnimius. It's not so. In every level, there is the relative chitzonius and pnimius, which obviously means that what's internal on one level, on a higher level, is external. So it's a constant process of avodah. Like the pasuk says, it's a pasuk in Yechezkel. And Hashem is speaking to the Navi and charging him with a very powerful shlichus message to the Yidden. It's actually a message of rebuke. It's a very strange nevuah. And he says, the Navi says, there appeared a Megillah, a scroll from the hand of heaven, ksuva panim va'acher, written literally panim va'acher on both sides. That's a literal meaning, the inside and the outside. Rashi at the simple level explains panim va'acher, referring to the scroll describing the events of the Jewish people in the past, what led them to where they are, and what's to come in the future. What they face and what's behind them. Panim is the future ones, and Acher are the events that passed. And to give this message to the Jewish people, summarizing their history, Acher behind them and what they're facing, if they don't do tshuva, he's actually told them to eat the scroll. He eats it, and it's sweet like honey. It's very mystical, a very mystical nevuah. Chassidus quotes this pasuk as conveying, in the brackets, pnimis v'chitzonius. This scroll, Megillah means a scroll, but Megillah also means revelation. The implication is that Hashem reveals himself panim va'acher, as he just stated. All of Ishtalshalos is laid out in a way that on every level there's the external, the internal, and so it ascends and descends. What is that? Shezeh klol she'inyan da'eretz v'kelim. So Seder Shtalshalos is made up of the light, literally, and the vessel. The vessel is the external dimension that contains the light, and the light is the internal dimension. And all of Shtalshalos is Eretz v'kelim. As mentioned, what's external on one level is revelation and pnimius on a lower level, on a higher level. And what's the root of Eretz v'kelim? B'shem v'sakdoshim, as we trace back this whole structure of light and vessels, Eretz and kelim, the source of it is in the holy names. A name, of course, means the way God is called, the way he expresses himself. And what are these two primary names? Hashem is Havaya v'Elikim. So Havaya, Yudke Vavke, is the inner dimension of Elikus, and Elikim is the external dimension. Or as often quoted in Chassidus, the pasuk Kishemesh Umogin Avaylikim. God, your Lord, is like the sun and the sheath of the sun. So Havaya is the sun, and Elikim is the sheath of the sun that filters the light, which would otherwise absorb us. So it has to be filtered. That's the Keli, that's Elikim. Some conclusion that the whole nature of Ishtalshalos is a process of Eir and Keli, Havaya and Elikim, a journey that involves this binary dynamic of external or internal, and that's really rooted in Havaya and Elikim, which means infinite and finite. God has chosen God has chosen to create a world that basically is a binary system. Yes and no. Havaya and Elikim, expression, containment. Oir and Keli, Pnimius, Chitzonius, it's all different expressions of this same truth, all rooted in Havaya and Elikim. And as we learn, the Habligvol, and then the Etzim Oir, Keichagvol, Keichabligvol. Right? That's the origin of this whole external, internal interplay that every level has. The one God chooses to express himself in these two ways, that they be ultimately fused and united and one. Now, let's continue. The Kivin, yeah, everybody's with me? Yes, yeah. Kivin Shakol Seder Shtalshalos. Nivra Bishvel Yisrael. Why is there a Seder Shtalshalos? There's the whole Seder Shtalshalos, the whole creation is because Hashem wants a relationship with the Yid. K'maymer, as our sages tell us, Rashi brings it, Bereshis, the beginning, Bereshis, two beginnings, Bishvil Yisrael, Shnikar Reshis. The world was created for Yidden and Torah, both which are called Reshis, the beginning. So since all of Ishtalshal is for what is for a Yid, are removing Sheyesh Bezin Yan Meilo Gamba Neshamas Yisrael. So a Yid too has these two dimensions of external and internal. In the Neshama, there's the external dimension of the Neshama and the internal. And that's what is expressed when the Pasuk in Tilim describes man's creation. Atem kruim Adam. That Yidden are called Adam, as the Gemara says. The term Adam is a reference to the Yidden in general. So what does the Pasuk say in Tilim? Ocher v'kedem sartani. Simple meaning is, you protected me behind and in front. Surrounded me with your protection. That's the simple meaning of the pasuk. The deeper meaning is, you tzartani, you formed me. Achar v'kedem, with a hinder part, the kedem and an internal part. So the neshama is created, it has these two dimensions. Now concluding, started with elikos, ishtalshalos, neshamas. So since the person is created in such a way, it's integral to his identity, that he has Ochel v'kedem, he has the hinder part, external. And he has the kedem, the ponim, the pnimius. Therefore, he has to engage his whole being in the service of God. Therefore, he must serve God, and that's the critical order of things, externally and internally. There's these two types of avodah that one doesn't give way to the other, and it's the end of it. An endless avodah of chitzonius and pnimius, and then further chitzonius, pnimius, this endless ascent externally and then entering internally, and then reaching greater heights, touching them externally, and then entering that level internally. So the avodah is, there's two levels of avodah from the achrei havaya. So the avodah, there's the avodah of going after God, as it were. It's chitzonius. You can sit here, wherever you like. And then the avodah from the baiti, the bakun, the pasuk concludes with. It's very pasuk. Follow God, your Lord, and in Him cleave, attach yourself. That's already shazel himitzad apnimius. That's the pnimius of bakshuponis benacha vayavakish. Reflected in the pasuk, seek my innards. Umitzad zeh, and because this is the avodah that Hashem wants, nase gam bechol seidar ishtalshalos ha'inyan deponim va'ocher pnimius v'chitzonius. The whole seidar ishtalshalos is likewise built on this system of external and internal. A very obvious illustration of that, friends, all of you, the Maimar that you said before the chasana, before the chuppah, in explaining the inyan of the badekenish is exactly this. That the badeken and the whole arichas in the Maimar, that the badeken, although external, is very lofty, but that's the achana to the yichud pnimi. And so this model continues in every aspect of avodah. Now, I doesn't explain it here in the Maimar, but the question is, so why not? I'm just suggesting this, based on other sources. Why can't it be the avodah pnimius without the avodah chitzonius? Go straight into the pnimius. Why the badekenish? But the avodah chitzonius is critical, because the avodah chitzonius expresses you're here by invitation. You don't waltz in. There is the humble and shy and bashful approach, and that's critical. And then one can enter the inner sanctum. It's also the meaning. It appears that they're knocking on the door before going into the oil and so on. Waltz in. And it's due. He's here. It's by invitation, and it's a ginger external knock on the door. A gentle touch. May I? Please allow me in. It's not a right. It's not a right. It's a privilege. The connection, the pnimius, is by privilege and by invitation, and therefore the avodah of achra v'alakechem teleichu, this standing out, as it were, on the outside, and the desire to connect is critical to the avodah pnimius. There cannot be avodah pnimius that's brazen, and it's not pnimius, that's abuse, without the avodah chitzonius. So it's a different kind of chitzonius. We don't mean chitzonius here as in you're not giving it your all. You're just marginally there. You're there completely, but you recognize you're on the outside. You're there with your whole heart, but I'm on the outside. And there's the request to be allowed by your grace and your invitation within. Let's continue. The Maimah say a little bit different. It's going to say, but it's not. It's not. I say it's looking further. It's all connected. All right, let's continue a bit further. Yeah. Ois Vav. That's right. You're just saying in marriage, v'chulu, the whole connection is on her terms, not on his terms. It's her rhythm, her cycle, and even then, it's by invitation. I once told it's a very beautiful word from Manis Friedman, and it's worth repeating. So one of it's just, I find it an exquisite gem, and we'll conclude with that. And that is, everybody knows that in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the time of the second Beis HaMikdash, so the Kohanim Gedolim often died immediately in the course of the year because of an impure, they were corrupt, and an impure thought in Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, which begs the question, for heaven's sakes, Kodesh HaKadoshim for a few moments. You worked very hard to get here. You don't have to be a big tzaddik to have your mind, not to have some impure thought. The simplest of you're on the Kodesh HaKadoshim. What's the impure thought? The impure thought is, I've earned this by right. That's the impure thought. That's the impure thought. That is the I'm looking for it. It has tainted completely and corrupted and abused the moment. I deserve this. That's the impure thought. I earned it. It's mine by right. Okay, so Be'ezrat Hashem, no, we'll go a bit further. So Vayomer be'inyan be'pnimis v'chetzonis k'mei Shabbat, to understand, now the mind will explain. Pnimis v'chetzonis, as it is in Avodah, Commission is boiling Yel Sef Gimel be'kitz b'negel pnimis v'chetzonis ha'moichem. Earlier, now we're talking Avodah, but earlier we spoke these two levels as it is in Moichin. Pnimis ha'moichem, chetzonis ha'moichem, right? Seeing, learning about it, bina, grasping the concept by the agency of parable and so on, or the concept itself, as we explained. So chitzonius and pnimius exists not only in, as we illustrated it, I said the word avodah, not avodah. We're talking about the way it is in the person. So before we spoke the way it is in Moichin, now we're going to go even deeper in Rotz, even higher faculties of the nefesh. There too is chitzonius and pnimius. As we said before, all of Ishtalshalas has these two dimensions. Shehei makeiches amakif, the transcendent keiches. So there too we have these two dimensions. Hainu pnimis v'chitzonius harotz. Va'ad lepnimis v'chitzonis hamidus. Now, what does he say va'ad? Like even, that's their lower levels, because Ratzon to begin with is a transcendent koyach, and midus are altogether by the very nature pnimis. I feel. In fact, the midus is what defines a person. Basically, the human condition is defined not by my intellect, what I know, what I perceive, but how I feel. That's pnimius. There too, there's chitzenius and pnimius, even in midus. When the matter is as follows. So what's it between external and pnimius when it comes to rotzen? We've spoken about this many times. The difference between inyan rotzen and atzmai, where it's pure rotzen, that's pnimius, as opposed to the rotzen shehu mishum kavon acheres, where a person has a will, it's his will, no one's forcing him, but he doesn't want this. This will is a means for something else. To illustrate, for example, the will to be involved in business. So why is a person involved in business? In order to make profit for his panos is basing to put bread on the table for his family. So he's going to get up in the morning and he goes to work because he wants to. But what's going on over here? There's actually two levels of rotzen. He wants to work. He wants the end result, the panos, the sustenance. He wants the paycheck at the end of the day. And because he wants the panos, the livelihood, the actual profit, so therefore the external will, he works. He has a will to involve in business, any other kind of livelihood, which actually is where he invests most of his time. Most of the time of his day and of his life is in the chitzenius. He's working. But if he could get the profit without working, would he? Of course not. But the only way to get the profit is to invest the time in work, so he works. So that is an example of chitzenius and pnimius. In other words, when the will is a means for an end, or the will is, this is it, not in order to get somewhere else. In a greater depth, as we probe this deeper, it means like this. Only engages the person externally. And therefore, even as he's doing it, there's room for another will. You have to do this business, and you go on another business. Even as he's engaged in it, he's not fully engaged. In fact, he's open to other possibilities. Which is the end of the day, the dollar. That's what he wants, and there's no room, no wiggle room there, no negotiation. And there's no room for any foreign desire. He wants the profit. So now we're going to go, continue, and likewise the midas. Very beautiful and avodah, very beautiful. Okay, let me say that, we'll go a little bit further because the Chaver want to hear the story. We will show up to, and the story I'm going to tell you, friends, it's a classic and it's a shattering story, a little bit. It's a classic, you may have heard it. It's a very famous story in Fidi Rebbe. Okay, let's just go a bit further. We just spoke about Ratzon now. So likewise, this process continues of chitzonius and pnimius as we enter into the conscious faculties. Starting with Moishe, as you said before, there's internal and external levels of both Chochmah and Bina. Moishe is like we said before, Chitzonius is when you understand how do you understand? Because you need explanations. Mashalim means mashal is a parable, and chida means like a puzzle.
Quiz.
A quiz, yeah, but I don't know if he means quiz in the sense like a question, find out the answer. But most of the chida goes together.
Riddle.
Yeah, riddle. but it's an external agency in order to understand the idea. In general, without going to the distinction between Chachma and Bina, is grasping the idea itself without it being enclosed in other parables and so on. Now going further into consciousness, deeper into consciousness, lower into consciousness. So likewise, the world of emotion. Hey, now there's two levels of emotion. Hey, there's the emotions as they draw from intellect, as they're born from intellect. And then we learned earlier that there's midas. The real source of midas is not intellect. Intellect just stirs them. Intellect is the agency which unlocks the midah. But the midas really are drawn in the will of the person. So therefore, the kivin shebaratzin primis v'chitzonius, since in Ratzin there's these two levels, and Moichin also primis v'chitzonius. Therefore, as they give birth to, and we trace their role in producing midas, lachein nimshach gam b'midas beizefan. So in emotions too, there are the two levels, experiences of emotion. There's an external emotional experience and the internal emotional experience. And what is that? Which, as we said before, once the true pnimis harotzen is where there's no room for any other will, as we said before, it comes to business. Pnimis harotzen is the profit. That's it. That's unnegotiable. How you get there, as much as he's invested in a particular business with all of his, with considerable talent and investure, he's open to another possibility and leave this business into another one. Likewise, when it comes to midas, so first, before we get to midas, first moichin. So likewise, pnimis hamoichin shenefus etzem haseichel mitosik mishalei levushim, where there's pnimis harotzen, it's firing. So this will then empower the moichin to also grasp beli levushim. He's saying seems he's saying is, to revisit this, but if a person really wants to understand and engages his pnimis harotzen, his seichel will grasp the concept at its depth. And furthermore, and he will not be able to tear himself away from the idea, and there's no room for even a counter argument. This needs to be thought through. When a person wants to understand something, and he wants to understand the mitzadis pnimis harotzen benefesh, so then he's saying he will not entertain any other way of understanding, any other approach. He wants to know the Torah view on this, and nothing else will the mind entertain. So that's the way it is in Moichin. So we'll continue. We'll stop here as he continues further down in emotion, the two levels of emotion. Chitzonius and Pnimius when it comes to midas as well. There's external love and internal love, and likewise the fears, as we'll see.